Okay, so we should be live now, Miriam.
Okay.
Hi, if you can hear me, it's Hamish Patel here from mortgagesonline.co.nz, and I'm here with Miriam Bell with New Zealand Property Investor magazine.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about changes coming up, well, proposed changes, specifically the changes to the Residential Tenancies Act. The government would like to see something a little bit nicer towards tenants, a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah, they say they want to make life better for tenants, I think is the word.
Security of tenure.
Yeah, security of tenure. Enable them to make rental properties more of a home, I suppose, than a transitory.
And we're also going to talk about touch on the healthy homes standards, which might mean more heating and insulation. So let's have a think about the tenancy. So some of the things proposed around the changes to the Tenancies Agreement Act is minimum for a fixed term.
Well, the fixed term agreement is up for discussion, as I understand it. So as I understand it from landlord advocates that I've talked to, a lot of tenants do prefer periodic tenancies. That's wrong. Fixed term tenancies as opposed to periodic tenancies. But I think the government wants to ensure that they're safer, and so that there's more options to stay for tenants. I suppose that would be the best way to look at it, and that the agreements reflect that. But at this stage, it doesn't seem that there's anything definite in that area decided on.
No, but ideally I think there's been some talk of a minimum of 2-year fixed term tenancy or potentially no fixed term tenancy, so it's just renews, but you have tighter controls around how you get someone to leave. Also, there's a little bit of talk about a right to renew after the fixed term tenancy, like an automatic right of renewal potentially.
I think there is. There's also, the government wants to make it harder, I suppose, to end a tenancy for no reason. You know, now it is possible to do that, but one of their things is that
longer, like they want 90 days instead of 42.
90 days instead of 42 days, but also to remove no cause terminations, so that you would have to give a reason.
And the interesting thing about that, so it is 90 day anyway right now, but there are some circumstances where you can do 42 days. For example, when you're selling your house, but it's proposed that maybe when you're selling your house, you have to give a 90-day notice, which I touched on before, going to be a little bit of a problem, because I know, especially first-time buyers with lower deposits, the approval from the banks are pretty tight approvals, meaning if they get something, they find a property, ideally they should settle within kind of 60 days. Most banks hold an interest rate for 60 days. So that's going to be tricky with a 90, if you give your tenant 90 days to vacate.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the points that has been raised by investor advocates as a potential problem, and not really very workable for many people, because it would impact on the sale in all sorts of ways, potentially.
And also there's a little bit, so even when you give a reason, there's a little bit of talk of maybe providing some evidence of the reason that you give to I
understand, but again, as you emphasised before, that a lot of this is up for discussion, so the devil will be in the detail as to what occurs after it goes through the whole consultation period. So that could go ahead quite as easily, it may not. So I think probably they're trying to emphasise that people shouldn't abuse. I have heard instances of people using the 42-day notice period, because I think you can do it if you've got a family. And that not being entirely legit. I would like to believe that's not common, but it does happen. And my feeling is they want to remove possibility for that.
Well, that should be interesting. All of this stuff is open for discussion. You just have to Google reform of the Residential Tenancies Act 1986, and you can actually have your say. We, again, the investor advocates that I've talked to really do encourage people to have their say on these reforms, because in order to ensure that there is a balance between landlords' rights and tenants' rights, you do need to get that viewpoint out there. So we'd encourage people to make a submission, to talk, to get involved in the consultation. So also pets, I think with pets, it might be that we have to have, well, you need to have a reasonable reason why you don't want pets.
That's my understanding, is that's what they put up for discussion, that rather than just saying no outright, a landlord would have to provide a reason for why a tenant can't have a pet. Again, it is open to discussion, and my feeling is that I know Housing New Zealand now is instituting a policy whereby tenants can have pets more easily, that they're going down a similar path, but that is one that a lot of people feel strongly about. I think one of the reasons for that is the issues around damage liability, which are a bit unclear, or post-Osaki they're a bit in favour of the tenant, and if there's a pet causing damage, that can become problematic.
Yeah, that's going to be scary for some landlords, but
I do feel that the government is wanting to encourage dialogue on the issue rather than saying you have to. That's just my feeling, and again, who knows how it could go.
Yeah, and some of this could be the worst case scenario, and maybe it's something, we end up with something somewhere in the middle. But there is a talk of a pet bond as well, so to kind of compensate, so an extra bond on top of the normal bond.
They're currently illegal at the moment, but they do have them in other countries. So again, when I've talked to investor advocates, they've all thought that's a good idea, that it would be helpful to have one or something along those lines. So.
And I think, so the other thing that has kind of been mentioned in that document as well is modifications, so making some kind of reasonable modifications. I don't really see a problem with that if they will be reversed, you know, so I think that...
Yeah. I think it probably comes down to the individual landlord. I know that, again, the European model, which apparently a lot of this is sort of vaguely based on, you can do that as long as you, as you say, reverse them back to the property back to the condition it was in. And if people did that, personally I can't see what the issue would be, but I guess the problem is if people don't return it back to its
and just leave.
And just go, I don't know what you're doing there. I don't know how I suppose you'd have to go through the tribunal, but Again, I haven't heard too many people, that hasn't been something people have expressed a lot of concern to me about, so maybe that's one that's more workable. Maybe only some people are upset by it, I don't know.
So let's just touch on the healthy home standard as well, because at the same time, this is another thing that's open for discussion right now. So this healthy home standards have just come out September, and again, you can Google it to submit your thoughts on it. I think there's a survey out there or something.
There's a whole load of documents. If you go to the website, there's quite a comprehensive rundown of the various documents you can read, and also that they do describe how to submit if you want to. The Healthy Homes Minimum Standards, although their final form, there's options in the document, so the final form's not fully decided, but they are going ahead and they have to be instituted by, I think it's July next year, 2019. So again, it is worth getting your say on those proposals, because they are going ahead in some form and they will impact on landlords, definitely. And definitely perhaps than the tenancy reform.
Yeah, and because this has already been passed in a way, but it's just the details that they're looking for, whereas the tenancies...
The Healthy Homes Guarantee Act is law, and this backs it up,
So I think some of the things that's open for discussion is around heat. So the big thing is heating.
And, insulation,
and
which
ventilation.
Is partly, ventilation, drafts and drainage. I think so,
So I think the big thing there, heating, again, it seems these few options that they're looking at. For me, a heat pump in the lounge seems kind of reasonable. But then a heat pump in every room seems a bit extreme.
Yeah. I think currently, as I understand it, under some 1947 regulations that the tribunal's been referring to recently, a landlord has to provide a adequate or an approved source of heating in the living area of the house. So that would sort of go along with that, I think, if you were to provide. But what type of heating is up for discussion?
Yeah, because that's a strange one for me, is if, I think having it compulsory to have a heat pump in the main living area maybe, but where it starts to talk about providing heaters, I just wonder, because if you can't afford, I
To turn
mean,
them
there
on.
are families that exactly. If you can't afford a $30-40 heater, then you're really not going to want to turn it on, because power bills are, they're not cheap.
I mean, I guess that's one of the flaws in the, or a potential flaw in the goal, because although landlords would have fulfilled their obligations if they provide a source of heating, they can't make people turn them on. So, it seems to me there is a bit of a flaw there in terms of the broader reasoning behind it.
Because I've even heard of heat pumps not being turned on.
So have I.
Because of power bills.
Yeah, and I don't know how you'd. There's nothing you can do though. You can't. I know that the government does have energy payments of some type, but I don't know how far they go.
Yeah. I think they've just released it to over 65-year-olds. I think
it was over 60 and vulnerable households. I think, but I might be wrong on that. I don't know what qualifies as a vulnerable household. But there's also other factors. Regionally, I've heard that in Rotorua, for example, heat pumps have a shorter lifespan because of the sulphur in the air. That is a concern presumably for landlords down there, because it does sort of make it more costly exercise. When I was writing a regional review on Dunedin recently, a couple of the people I spoke to didn't think heat pumps were, they thought there were better options for heating in Dunedin for whatever reason. So, there is all sorts of issues at play.
The insulation. So the insulation standards, I mean, that's law anyway in July. Yeah. You have to have insulation at a level. I think it's 1.9 in the ceiling and 1.9 or 1.2 in the down on the floor boards. But there is talk of maybe having thicker, better, and the standard being a little bit higher than that.
I think currently they have to be insulated to, as I understand it, there was a standard at
1.9.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was introduced at a certain point, and if you upgrade it further than that to the current levels, there's that's contentious, because there's potentially not as much benefit from the cost as you would expect. If you see where I'm going.
I think there was some talk about whether if you go to the new standard, how much added benefit is there. But from the quotes I've been getting lately, I think if you put insulation in the last probably few years, it's been to the new,
I would imagine,
worst case scenario that could be presented to landlords.
Yeah, I think
anyway. So
unless they suddenly veer off course, but I don't really think that would happen.
No, I think the insulation thing is probably okay. That's nothing new. Ventilation, that'll be interesting, because ventilation could be a bit interesting.
I think
because you can open windows.
You can,
and I have seen a lot of tenants that don't like to open windows.
And that's a point of much debate on our Facebook page. Often is and others is how do you get tenants to do things like that, which do have an impact. That will be outweighed if people don't do it, I suppose. I don't know. You can't legislate to make people open their windows. So
well, you can't. But the Healthy Homes Bill, the Healthy Homes Standards is going on. But the reform of the Residential Tenancies Act, the other document I talked about, which is open for submission, actually does have some talk about some of the tenant responsibilities as well. So you could submit and
you
talk
could.
about that.
It wants to encourage people to look at whether the current sort of, I guess, balance of rights and responsibilities between landlords and tenants is adequate for the current age, when there are a lot more renters, for example, than there were in the past. So I think it is an important discussion that needs to be had. I think for landlords, ensuring that you have, working to maintain a good relationship with your tenants and communicate is probably a key point.
Yeah.
And I've talked to a few people who suggest that education all round for both landlords and tenants, who not all obviously, but those who need it, would also be helpful. But it's veering off a bit. But again, that could cover things like open your windows if you're a tenant. It sounds basic, but
I think, Miriam, in summary, I reckon the actual these changes going on, it could be pretty simple. Some of them are very reasonable, and I think your major cost, I mean, looking at them, it could be that you spend another $3-4 grand to set up a new property if it doesn't have a heat pump. you have to really vet your tenants pretty hard.
I think so.
Because if it's harder to move them on, you need a much better quality rental manager. You need to make sure you've got references and stuff,
Yeah.
At the same time, you probably have to put up a better stock. You have to put up a nicer house to attract the top tier tenants.
Yeah,
and it doesn't have to be amazing, but you still need to get the top of the bunch.
Basics, yeah.
But all in all, I think it's reasonable. But I think the real issues are going to be the tenants that are actually living in those substandard homes, those really, really cheap rentals. I feel like they will just not have a choice, because those properties will just disappear. They'll be just abandoned. There are properties in Tamaranui. I was driving through there, looking at some of those properties that are less than 200 grand. You're never going to make your money back if you spend 50 grand to get an old bungalow to the current standard.
Yeah, and as I understand it from investor advocates, that is a concern of theirs, that people will just, as you said, either leave them empty or sell them maybe and not replenish the rental stock, and that does impact on lower income tenants who are, the people who are struggling.
They won't have choice.
There'll be less choice, which I know that tenant groups would argue differently, but the reality is, if it costs too much for somebody to to get their rental property to the standard required, they're probably not going to. And then it's gone.
But thanks for coming in, Miriam.
Thank you for having me. Always good to chat.
And thanks for listening. Hopefully you got something out of it. And remember, us for a mortgage or NZ Property Investor Mag. The physical copy, which is physical magazines, are coming back in fashion.
They're available. And I think we have them in most supermarkets and bookshops and etc. They're easily accessible, the hard copy.
Subscribe online.
Yep, subscribe online. Check out our
reasonable.
Facebook page. Yeah. And we do try to encourage, we want to educate people on the things that are happening and get them up to speed with what they need to know. So if you want to find out more, please look us up.
Cool.